Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Dr. Marina Theodotou. I'm the new Executive Director of the Defense Innovation Board and the designated federal officer. I'm super excited today to welcome our Defense Innovation Board for our fall meeting. Today's meeting is being live streamed and recorded to allow members of the public to attend live or view later. I would like to thank the Defense Media Agency for supporting the production today, as well as everyone who was involved to make this event happen. The board will now convene in its public session, and for that, please allow me to share some procedural remarks. The board is a discretionary independent advisory board operated under the Federal Advisory Committee Act and the Government Sunshine Act. Today's meeting was announced in the Federal Register notice posted on October 25th, 2023. There have been no significant changes to the agenda. And the meeting's agenda has been posted on the Federal Register notice. The public was invited to provide their feedback, and we received those up until the 9th of November at 12 noon. And we'll be highlighting a few comments that we received out of the 57. If you'd like to review all those comments, they are posted on our website. These comments have been shared with our board, and they will be taken into consideration to inform the board's efforts in the current and upcoming studies. And now I would like to turn it over to our chair, the chair of the Defense Innovation Board, Mr. Mike Bloomberg. Mr. Bloomberg, over to you.
Well, thanks, Marina, and welcome to your first public meeting as Executive Director, and we're glad to have you. Hello to everyone watching online, and thank you for joining us. This is the fall 2023 meeting of the Defense Innovation Board, otherwise known as the DIB, and there are two main items on the agenda today. First, we'll provide interim status reports on the two studies our board is leading. Then we'll look ahead and discuss the topics we plan to tackle in our next round of studies. As we've shared with the public before, the mission of this board is to provide independent recommendations to Secretary Austin and other senior leaders across the Defense Department. All of us are honored to serve and to support a department that is a global leader in so many ways at the forefront of military strength and preparedness. The pace of change in the private sector, especially in technology, is moving at the speed of light, and all public agencies struggle to keep up. Our job on this board is to help bridge the private and public sectors in ways that help empower our men and women in uniform who face no shortage of urgent challenges. Right now, Russia's war in Ukraine is dragging on, and Israel's is now at war with Hamas. New threads emerge every day, so the issues we're examining aren't academic or ones we can kick down the road. The recommendations we're developing are all designed to help the department's leaders take action, try new approaches, and give our brave service members the tools they need to do their very demanding jobs across the world. I'm glad to say that the board continues to gain insight from a diverse group of leaders across the defense and technology community. After dozens of different conversations, it became increasingly clear that in some cases, antiquated processes, policies, or regulations were functioning as roadblocks to innovation in the department. That reality informs the first study we'll cover today, and that is lowering barriers to tech adoption. The second study, still in progress, is focused on organizing, digitizing, and streamlining vast amounts of Defense Department data, and doing so before the department expands its use of cutting-edge technology like artificial intelligence. Sue Gordon is leading the former study, and Ryan Swan the latter. I'll ask Sue to share an update first, and board members will have the opportunity to comment and ask questions as well. Sue, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mike. I'll kick off the update to our study on lowering barriers to innovation. And I must tell you that I am so excited about this. We all know that the defense innovation ecosystem is fraught with bureaucratic overhead, inefficient processes, and self-imposed barriers that slow us down. And these impediments are really mostly born of being developed at a time long ago where the challenges and opportunities were different. So with this study, we're tackling the barriers that are easiest to tackle and have the most impact. And by easiest, what I mean is that they are implementable, that there is no statute or reason other than our own choice that should stop us from implementing these policy, procedural, or process changes. And here's the way to think about it. By removing these barriers, it will enable us to move faster at scale to deliver outcome. My motto is, oh, you wanted to use it. So this sounds small and narrow, but I think what it will do is deliver meaningful, tangible impact to how quickly we're able to move and get good solution developed by our partners in the private sector into the hands of those that need it. So before we invite our guests to offer their perspective that you really ought to listen to on these key barriers, let me quickly turn to my teammates on this study to see if there's something I missed or something you want to add. Admiral Mullen, I'll start with you and then we'll go around the horn.
Yeah, so I guess, can you, because I know we've obviously spent some time on this, can you maybe highlight just a few of the kinds of things that we're looking at this point? What the areas that we see barriers and that we might be able to do something, given also we're not through this thing yet.
Yeah, so the areas that we're, thanks, Mike, should have done it. The areas that we're looking at are everything from security processes, whether that is individual security clearances or secure facilities and their broad use, to the authority to operate in a secure ecosystem, to personnel practices, to the acquisition mechanisms themselves, everything ranging from the asks that we have or the data we need to receive. So think about all the areas of the innovation process involving our people, our security, our acquisition systems, and our information systems. If we can look at those to make sure that they are tuned for the moment in which we find ourselves, rather than for the processes that we've held over so many years. Any other members want to jump in? Well, Mike, I'm going to take that as a sign of the clarity of the study and more, that everyone can't wait to hear from our speakers about their perspective.
The silence is a compliment in this case.
I'll take it, Mr. Chairman.
Marina, we have some speakers. Would you introduce them?
Yes, sir. So we're delighted to welcome our speakers today that will help us understand a little bit more what they're facing, what kind of barriers to innovation they're facing in the front line. So first, I'd like to welcome Chief Warrant Officer Matt Pine, who currently serves as Future Operations Officer for the 1st Maintenance Battalion in the U.S. Marine Corps, and is working to reshape maintenance and supply support concepts in areas with logistical restrictions to keep pace with near-peer adversaries. So, Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for making time to be here. The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Board, for having me. I have twofold points that I'm going to address today. You actually hit on these already, but I'm just reinforcing them. So, single greatest barrier that we face is the acquisition and approval process. As we know, it takes 3 to 5 years, 3 to 5 years to vet and approve anything to get from R&D into the hands of the warfighter. Part of that comes from us going from over 50 primary companies down to essentially 5 in the last 30 years. That took our industrial base and created an industrial pillar. As a result, the industrial base, taxpayers, and service members are all suffering due to the monopolies, costs, and lead times. These can be stemmed from various reasons, but if I'm the sole source of supply, I don't have to be good at it. So we haven't created a lot of competition. Additionally, as we know, casting and forged parts are difficult to get, and we're working through innovative solutions to find those. There are other tools available to bypass the system, but you're working within and around the system rather than it being the standard. An example of something that's very restrictive right now is Section 848 from the 2020 NDAA, which kills drone proliferation. In a prime example that I see that regularly, we do innovation training in Okinawa through a company up near DC, and they do their actual drone training off base because it's easier to get access and approval to operate in Japanese areas than it is to fight through the red tape and get caught up with what industry is actually doing because the policy is slow to change. So recommended actions for that: streamlining acquisitions, rapid fielding, and promotion of competition. Some of that's already being worked. I know that's continuing to be addressed by the DoD. And then the last piece is requiring technical data as we acquire equipment. It's great that we're buying all of this and we're pushing this out to the warfighter, but we're getting it with no technical data and no way to maintain it or fix it when we need to at the point of need. The results from this, if we streamline our acquisitions and broaden the industrial base, we can promote competition and force technical data. It will allow us to truly learn the systems inside and out and enable us to repair it when we need to repair it and where we need to repair it. The contracts don't do us the justice that we need. I saw this firsthand in Afghanistan. There were contractors in place to do maintenance, and I was the Marine going out and doing the maintenance that they were there to do because they simply couldn't get to where they needed to get to. We also need to open the policy for development and proliferation of technology, which is going to allow us to truly be on the leading edge of technology rather than waiting on them to push through the lengthy approval process. There's a lot to that, but that's the big ask there. The biggest internal barrier that I see within the DoD, it's bred by a culture of compliance, and it comes back to the policies. So we promote based on compliance. You show that you're good at what you do, and we expect you to comply with the requirements that we put in place. The training enforces compliance. Another issue is the next Steve Jobs typically doesn't join the military. So it's hard to find that talent and that desire to change things when we're focused on complying. An additional barrier that we have is constantly moving. So you get removed within your job, you get moved within your duty stations. We're constantly revolving. It's an open door. And it's very, very difficult to improve processes if you're just learning the process. You can't break the rules properly if you don't know them. That's my motto. Actions. So internally, we need to encourage leaders across the DoD to understand and question why we do things rather than just saying, hey, that's the policy, we have to do it. We can't change the status quo if we're afraid of questioning it, and a lot of leaders don't want to risk careers by questioning the status quo. Can we do that by bringing in individuals at senior restricted grades to provide their technical expertise? I don't know. That's a very tough question to ask. And then the final recommendation for actions here would be to kill the up or out requirement for promotions and allow people to truly stay where they're technical experts. If we do that, it will allow them to truly learn their skills and their craft and be able to develop it further than just making sure that they're compliant before they move on to the next job.
Well, Matthew, I should have ceded my time to you. I think you did a brilliant job of showing the entire vertical of possibility for innovation and change. I also think what you did was highlight the dual need of opening the aperture and creating systemic solutions, not just one-offs where we'll do something and it won't achieve repeatable outcome. So thanks. Good stuff.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Matt, Mike Bloomberg, let me ask you, how long have you been in the Marine Corps?
17 years, sir.
You don't look old enough to be 17 years, but we appreciate your wisdom, and it's a lot of the things that we've said before, and hearing them coming from somebody who's had actual experience on the ground gives us some great hope that we really can make some changes. So thank you for your service to this country, and thank you for your service to this panel.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, sir.
Marina?
We do have time for additional members to comment on Matt's insights.
Hey, Matt, Mike Mullen, thanks for all of what Mike Bloomberg just said. What's the biggest threat to promotion in what you see?
I think the biggest threat is when you question status quo. There's usually many, obviously you understand there's layers in the chain of command, and you have to find a champion somewhere to back you. Otherwise, you're just a voice in the dark. And those champions, as I stated, sometimes can be very difficult to find. It can take 5 years to change policy, and that's a quarter of a career. So it's you have to continue to push and push and push and have that voice behind you pushing that to assist. I always say I can't promote a junior Marine to Master Gunnery Sergeant tomorrow, even if he has the best ideas and the best capabilities.
Right.
There's still blocks in the way.
Marina, anything else?
I think we have additional comments. I think Ryan is making some comments. Mr. Swan, over to you.
Yeah, I was on mute. Thanks for coming and chatting with us on the panel. And definitely thank you for your service. You mentioned technical data, getting access to technical data as something that was critical for us to be able to leverage the technology solutions, fix them where we need to. What's the biggest barrier of us getting access to that data for the systems that we deploy abroad or at home?
The easy answer is money. But a lot of it comes down to, it goes back to if I'm the sole source of provider or the sole source of supply, I'm not going to give that up. I'm not going to give that monopoly up by giving you my technical data. There's a lot of apprehensions within industry for letting us kind of have free reign to what they make. Plus, if they can contract the repairs to us, they're going to make a lot more money in the long run as it currently sits than if they just let us outright maintain our own equipment.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Sir.
Thank you. Any additional thoughts from Matt before we go to our next speaker? Matt, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. Yes, sir.
Thank you for the time.
Over to you, sir. Thank you, Matt. We really appreciate your time and your service. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Ryan Connell, who is the co-founder and current deputy director of the Defense Contract Management Agency, the Commercial Item Group. So Ryan has over 15 years experience in cost estimating, pricing and negotiation, cost and compliance, commercial acquisition, and market-based pricing. Ryan, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to the board. Just to preempt the conversation here to talk about, my personal views and opinions don't necessarily represent the agency, but definitely excited to talk to you about some of the challenges that I see from my perspective. So, I look at the world and I think we know how to make, but I question if we've figured out how to adapt and buy, and I'll use that term a couple times today. Really meaning adapting ourselves to understanding what exists in the commercial technology market space, and then being able to reflect our requirements based on that, and then executing the purchase. I think we have an acquisition system designed for making really complex weapon systems. And in terms of fairness and fiscal responsibility and delivering world-class weapon systems, we've created a system that makes some of the coolest pieces of technology that we have. GPS is a great example of something that once was a top secret military program, but has led to commercialized industry disruptions. That system made a lot of sense in an era where DoD led the world in developing the coolest, newest technology. I believe today's different. I believe a lot of that coolest, newest technology is coming out of our startup community and coming out of commercial tech. Right. So I look at this decisive decade that we're in. I think we need to learn how to adapt and buy versus that kind of mindset of make and create. And for context, I look at Russia and Ukraine that was brought up earlier. This seems to me to be a scrappy war, a whatever I can get my hands on type of war. We're seeing things like COTS drones that have satellite phones duct tape them to get a couple hours of reconnaissance. Things like remote controlled toy boats being strapped with explosives and being sent off to look for warships. This past year, September 29th, I was part of a fire drill for our department, looking for a purchase of a bunch of drones from a specific university. I involved my network to the maximum that I could. Despite a lot of really good ideas, we were unable to execute a same-day purchase, and the funds expired. So I think about these stories, and I constantly wonder, if we were in a war like that, would we be able to execute that whatever I can get my hands on type model, that adapt and buy model? So some ideas on how to fix it. I really have three things I want to talk about. But potentially, the idea of just adding some scrutiny and potential policing of developing overly complex requirements, which potentially could have been solved using just existing commercial products in the marketplace, right? So potentially adding resistance in areas that acquisition, the FAR tells us are not the preferred ways of doing business. So number one is looking at section 6716 of the 23 NDAA. This was a statute or section specifically related to the intel community, but it really further defined and required how intensely we need to do FAR Part 10 market research, specifically in that requirements phase, and documenting that there really were no COTS, NDI, or commercial services available. I also think when we do that analysis, it's worth exploring and highlighting the role of what I do in my day job, the centralized capability in US Code 3456, bringing in that market research expertise to help define those requirements based on what exists in the marketplace. Point two, consider using and exploring monetary and incentive awards for those acquisition professionals who take those smart, calculated risks and are specifically really good at finding creative ways to leverage existing commercial technology. And I think that needs to be outside of our normal DoD annual award structure and more of an ad hoc opportunity to monetize and find incentives for those individuals that are performing. And sharing, which brings me to my third point. I think storytelling is huge. I think that we have platforms like LinkedIn, which has kind of migrated to be a DoD platform for sharing some of these stories. But I look at things like the law of diffusion of innovation, right? We have 180,000 acquisition professionals in DoD. The law tells us that somewhere around 16% of innovators and early adopters is where that tipping point happens for mass acceptance. That's 30,000 professionals. I don't have 30,000 followers on LinkedIn. I don't know many people that do. I don't know if we're going to have 30,000 people listening to this talk. So we really have to find a way to keep sharing those stories so we do get to that point of kind of mass adoption and the law takes over. Assuming those things happen, kind of my expected results out of those, I think you'll see things like movie quality video cameras mounted in country that support an anti-IED mission instead of, for example, developing a robotic bomb sniffing convoy, right? Commercial solution to a military requirement. I think you'll see things like 3D printed boats coming out of the University of Maine being done in 72 hours, able to produce hundreds at the same price of a traditional defense program. And lastly, I think you'll see increased competition because you're reducing the military unique requirement to meet the marketplace and not creating unique requirements and letting the marketplace figure out how to meet them. This is an adapt and buy world, and I just hope the department can participate. That's my time.
Mariana?
Thank you so much, Ryan. Really appreciate your insights here and the way you structured those barriers and your observations. Sue, I'll turn it over to you for your initial comments and then the rest of the board.
Yeah, Ryan, you highlighted a lot of both macro and micro issues that I think are one within the scope of what we're looking at, and two, exactly the sort of things that should be achievable in short order. I particularly love your idea about, I'm gonna put words in your mouth, credit cards, not contracts.
Sure.
Your story about the opportunity to make a same-day buy, the availability of a same-day buy, and our difficulty in pulling it off despite it being our intention is exactly, to me, the sweet spot of what we as a collective community are trying to achieve. So I thought your story was perfect, and I wrote those things down because I think they're the kind of things that would make a huge difference while we're doing some of the bigger things open up the aperture. And I also couldn't agree more about where the strength of America and this moment lies. It's in the entrepreneurs, whether they're in big or small companies, who are looking at national security differently and the opportunity they have to help us along our way. So your comments were right on to me.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Chair, over to you.
Anybody else have anything? Ryan, thank you for your service. And I think most of the committee, maybe all of this committee, thinks you are spot on. And we will certainly avail ourselves of plagiarism and repeat what you've said. So thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Now over to Ryan. Ryan, please brief us on what we're calling the Data Economy Study.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Happy to kick off an update for building a data economy for the DoD study, and I'll invite my fellow members to chime in as we talk about it. Listen, at a high level, we know that in order to out-innovate our adversaries and support the warfighter, it's imperative that DoD utilizes data as a product to responsibly harness the power of data, analytics, and disruptive technology like generative AI, large language models. And so the purpose of the study is to strengthen the data centricity and really enhance our decision advantage in the department. And we plan to do it in a couple ways. The first is to assess the current state of the data economy at DoD, identifying gaps and opportunities, and things that we should take a hard look at that can ultimately improve our ability to unlock the value of data. But also to provide kind of the best-in-class industry best practices that the department needs. And those could be things from principles to frameworks to metrics to methodology that's ultimately, again, going to allow us to unlock that value. And then third and finally is really to develop actionable outcome-driven recommendations that's going to allow us to build on our current strategies, our current initiatives, that's going to ultimately allow us to scale the use of data and analytics, scale the use of that DoD data economy for 2025 and beyond. So before I invite our two speakers to share thoughts about key barriers to the data economy, I want to turn it over to my colleagues to see if there are any comments regarding our study so far.
Does not seem to be any questions, so why don't you go ahead and introduce the two speakers?
I can do that for you, Ryan. So it's a pleasure to welcome Mr. Thomas Sasala, the Deputy Director of the U.S. Army Office of Enterprise Management. Mr. Sasala was most recently the Chief Data Officer for the Department of the Navy. Mr. Sasala, thank you so much for being here with us today. We appreciate your time and insights. And you have the floor. You have about 5 minutes, sir. Over to you.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the board members for taking the time out of your day to do this. I think this is important for us to kind of get the message out. And in large part, I'm going to speak on a couple of different topics, but they're all interrelated. And this is really drawn on my time as previously as a Chief Data Officer for the Department of the Army, and then the Navy, and now I'm back to the Army doing predominantly business operations. But what we found over the years in the DoD and all the way back into my time in the intelligence community is knowing where our data is, having access to that data, and having the skills, the knowledge, and more importantly, the willingness to use that data for decision making and to drive outcomes is a challenge for the DoD. It is a challenge for the government writ large. Right. So what I have noticed and what me and my coworkers, I would say, have noticed is there's a interesting bias against using real data. Instead, we oddly rely on our trusty PowerPoint presentations, which may or may not have a solid basis in data or facts for decision making. And so This is not necessarily, I don't like to call this a cultural barrier. Predominantly because a culture becomes a crutch. We say we can't do something because, oh, it's just the culture of the organization and it's too hard or whatever. So what we started doing, predominantly my time in the Navy and also in the Army as well, is start chipping away at this by just removing some of the, what we'll call the lower level barriers to our data itself. And really start by inventorying our data, just simply knowing what data we have. It would be a wonderful world if we say that we had some sort of cyber incursion on system X, if we knew instantaneously what data was in that system and the sensitivity of that data, the potential impact of that data being compromised or exfiltrated from the environment. In many cases, we don't know those answers, right? So we cataloged our data. More importantly, we cataloged the systems, the data sets, and the data products that we have registered in those systems. And then that led me to a little bit of an epiphany. And this is a situation where I think it's the lessons learned and something we're trying to recover from a little bit. And that is we had to engage in a campaign of learning for our total force. And so the concept of data awareness and the knowledge of data and the general upscaling of the workforce in terms of their acumen when it comes to data and data management. I've run into a number of senior leaders in my day who claim, well, I don't really know anything about data. Yet every single day they're using data to make a decision one way or the other. They might not be an expert data scientist or know Python programming or whatever, but at the end of the day, they literally are using data to do everything that they're doing. And so just understanding some of those fundamentals, and I jokingly said to someone just recently, it's not a data 101 class. We need a data 1.0 class, and then a 10, right? And then a 101. Really getting people up to the fundamentals. And this goes for the total workforce. And I said this to the board earlier in an earlier session. In 20 years, this problem will generally resolve itself because the workforce will be digital native. They will be data natives, right? But in this case, we're not right now. So we need to get there. And so one of the things we started doing is working on that training of the workforce and having different tiers, senior leader level training that would resonate more with them, what we call kind of mid-tier or general knowledge worker sort of training. And then one of the things we still have yet to do, but we're working on, and I would be interested in the warrant officer's opinion on this, is as you get into basic training, is you're learning your basic skills in your occupational specialty, putting data in there and making data a center part of that training, and understanding how the DoD manages data, understanding why some of the DoD data is different than normal data and why it needs to be protected differently. We're not a unicorn, we're not a snowflake, but there are some things that we do that maybe the rest of the public sector doesn't do. And so we need to acknowledge that, and we need to make provisions for it. But what I will also say is we don't need to let that maybe 5 or 10 or 15 or 20% of that data inventory hold us back, which it does in many cases. Where we try to solve the hardest problems first. So with that, I will leave you with just the thought that I started pondering a while ago, which is a modern world is data-driven. And without data readiness, you can't have a ready military force. So we need to train our soldiers on data like we train them on the platforms and the weapons they use every day, right? And so the soldiers need to be comfortable with using data at the speed of mission to achieve that operational advantage and the overmatch that we desperately need. Turn it back over to Marina.
Thank you so much, Tom. Great insights. I love what you mentioned about training every soldier to be versatile with data as they are with their weapons. And with that note, I'd like to turn it back to Ryan for his comments, and then back open to the rest of our board for their insights. Ryan, over to you.
Absolutely. Listen, thank you, Tom. I really appreciate your insights, and it's very aligned with what we see out in industry in regards to best practices from a kind of really a people, process, technology. You have to really understand what data you have, where is it, but the people process part, building that data acumen is very important, and I couldn't agree more. Let me ask you one quick question. You mentioned some of the lower levels of barriers that you guys are trying to start to really chip away at. I think you used in your mind. What are the higher level barriers that you see that we as an organization, if we make it both important and urgent at the same time, that we should tackle, we should look at? What's that one or two things that come front of mind for you?
Yeah, Matt mentioned this earlier. I would say that the funding is clearly a barrier in many cases. Data things don't compete well when you compare them to the next Abrams or the next aircraft carrier, right? So if you're not blowing something up, you're not doing legitimate military work. I would argue you can't blow anything up without data. So if you don't start with that basis, then maybe, whatever. But actually, the number one thing that I think that I could use your help with, and we could use your help with, is senior leaders at the most senior level of the department need to make data important. They need to make the training, they need to make the access, they need to make the use of data important. During my time in the Navy, I did have the opportunity to participate in a couple of DMAGs with the Deputy Secretary of Defense, and we used legitimate dashboards in those meetings, and we looked at data, meaningful data with not just metrics. It wasn't a stoplight chart. It was actual raw, some of the data was raw, some of the data was more quantitative. And we made some decisions based off that information. I don't see that happening as much today as I did maybe back a year or two ago. Certainly when Secretary Esper was the Secretary of the Army, he did it every Monday morning. It was fascinating to watch him run a staff meeting every Monday morning with the senior leaders of the Department of the Army, which you don't see that very often in the DoD. It's kind of countercultural to bring your senior leaders together and speak to them on a regular basis. So someone like the Secretary of Defense or the Deputy Secretary of Defense, not just standing up and saying the data is a strategic priority, but actually demanding the use of data in their own meetings, right? And then making decisions, and more importantly, going back and measuring the effectiveness of those decisions with data, right? And then being willing to change the decision or change your approach based off the data. So if you make a decision to increase hiring or decrease hiring times and it's not having the effect, go back and refactor. And it's a discovery then recovery. So don't fear the discovery process. And I see that a lot in the DoD.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom.
Anybody else? Marina?
Admiral Manel, did you have any additional comments?
Yeah. Hey, Tom, Matt brought up the whole issue of how do you get contractor data? I mean, obviously in the field is what he was talking about. How do you do that? You got any, and I'm sure it's very difficult to get at the point he made about they can make a lot of money on it. Is there, can you see a way ahead with respect to that?
Yeah, there's a couple simple things I think we could actually do in that regard, and it's a great question. It's actually very challenging, but at the end of the day, look, they're way better at writing contracts than we are, the corporate sector, and having spent over a decade in the private sector and now almost over 20 years in the public sector, I can appreciate the perspective, right? But if you look at the new modern gig companies, right, they're all data-centric companies. From the day zero, there was no getting into data, right? So some of the traditional defense integrators are really just trying to start to learn how to monetize their data, right? And unfortunately, sometimes it has deleterious effects to the DoD. So adding clauses into our contract saying the data must be freely available to the DoD or the government, if you want to go as far, right? And then having the legal basis. There's enough provisions already in the FAR that give us legal access to the information. But it turns out if we leave those clauses out, then there's a kind of cultural bias in the acquisition community to let the contractors have their way whenever they want to do these things. And I'm not saying this is bad. I'm just saying that there's this fear of lawsuits that kind of is at the detriment of the government. So making it clear up front and thinking of these things on day zero, not on the 1000th day of a contract that has gone sideways, I think is just the simplest, easiest thing to get after it. I appreciate the question, though.
Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you, everyone, for your insights and building on what Tom mentioned. Next, we'd like to invite Ms. Meredith Fonseca to take the floor. Ms. Fonseca was appointed as the U.S. Army Pacific Chief Data Officer in August of 2023, and previously she was the Director of Research Development for the U.S. Army Special Operations Command. Meredith, welcome. Thank you so much for your time and insights today. You have the floor. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Ma'am, thank you, and board members, it's a pleasure to be here today. As mentioned, I am down at the U.S. Army Pacific Command here in Hawaii, so we have a little bit more of a tactical perspective. To help frame this, and I mentioned this to the board previously, but we are very concerned with fighting as not just an Army, but a joint partner with all the other services And of course, the US fights no fight alone, so the mission partners and allies in a theater where we do not have NATO. So agreements on data sharing, data rights with those mission partners are often bilateral nation to nation, and they are often changing but politician to politician, unfortunately, in some of these nations. We struggle with not just data cataloging, as mentioned by Mr. Sasala. That is accurate. We are struggling with data cataloging here within the Army. Part of that is programs of record, systems of record, sometimes have data rights. Sometimes the data is owned by the vendor and it's too expensive to go back and procure it, or we don't have interface control documents, APIs. So we're unable to really use and display that data in tactical tools like common operational pictures, common intel pictures. And we struggle with prioritizing those very finite resources that don't fit squarely into an acquisition cycle, right? Data and technology professionals are astute at using systems like Agile, as opposed to 5-year, put it in the palm. So if you asked me 4 years ago, Meredith, should we palm for a GPT-like LLM capability? I probably would have said no, right? And we don't have a crystal ball at the speed which these technologies are moving. And so we're not programming for them in a way where I just have a placeholder bucket, right, for them. And as a result, we're reacting in a manner that's ad hoc. Right now, as a nation, we are struggling many threats. We see the crisis in Israel. We are supporting and helpful with Ukraine. And as a result, we are reducing the resourcing and the prioritization towards the pacing threat in the Pacific. So as we do that, we're really, kind of getting too thin in some cases here. I would challenge, that's how we kind of view the operating environment, is this need for a joint, a partner, and a predictable resource. That's my big takeaway for you. My second, and maybe smaller, because I recognize it's a challenging nut to crack, is the human capital. We see many organizations bringing in a CTO, a chief technology officer, a chief data officer. Some cases, those are unique requirements. In many cases, they're sort of blended and interdependent. They're bringing in an HQE for a period of 2 years from industry. Oftentimes, that individual is technically very efficient, but lacks the ability to navigate some of the bureaucracies and policies and acquisition process that we're living. As many of you acknowledged already, 2 years is a very challenging time to indoctrinate you to the US government and ask you to get something done. And oh, by the way, when I appointed you, no one really works for you, and the organizations under you cannot respond to your requests because the lower echelons, there isn't data or technology at echelon across the DoD. I'm going to say that again. There is not data or technology focused, dedicated personnel at echelon. In some cases, it is built out of hide. It is built out of personality. Oh, this person writes code in Python. This person writes in R and C+. That guy knows a lot about cloud engineering. He's going to help us get a cloud instance here, a hybrid cloud. Okay, is that our plan for storage, for compute? It's ad hoc, and I'd love to see us come together and make recommendations about how to make those things prioritized, predictable, resourced, and standardized across the joint enterprise so that we can work together in a more efficient way. Does it come at a cost? Yes. Are we going to have to ask ourselves as a nation, what's the bill payer to build this data and technology professional at echelon? We will have to modernize to do that. Then we'll also have to retain these professionals. I lived this years ago, as you heard, in special operations, standing up unmanned systems. We lost a number of uniformed and civilian professionals to high-paying COCO, contractor-owned, contractor-operated opportunities because there was a huge demand and we couldn't compete as a DoD. Oh, I can give you a small bonus of $5,000. Well, let's get creative as a board, as a community of professionals, and say, what if I sent you to industry on a 2-year leave of absence to upskill, to earn a little bit, to recalibrate your skills, and then we ask you to come back and we incentivize you to come back and bring that goodness to the DoD, and you still earn your retirement benefits and all of it, you don't lose your sick time or whatever. But right now we really incentivize our government civilians to stay put and not leave, and their skills become perishable. and we lose the ability to retain them against higher paying opportunities in large firms like your Microsoft, your Google, your Scale AI, all of those opportunities, but also the really small and uniquely high paying off potentially startups. And so I want to leave that with you. How do we resource? How do we look at this at Echelon from a multinational perspective, where we don't have NATO against a pacing threat that has not changed their priorities, and do it at a joint way? And then how do we manage human capital? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Meredith. I really appreciate your comments and your insight from a tactical perspective. But let me ask a question. When we think about the joint force and partnering with our allies abroad, especially what's happening around the world, how do you think about that data sharing? What can make that accelerate in order for us to get the right information to the right organizations at the right time? Is it standards? Is it collaboration? What is it? Is it a communication of our systems? Help me just unpack that on where you think we could really move the needle from.
Yes, sir. I wish it was just one thing. Mr. Sasala said it very well. Our senior leaders using data, trusting the data, right? Are we trusting the data? And are we asking for data visualization? I want to see real data, not a PowerPoint, real data, right? Am I fighting off of a common operational picture? Right now we have an Army common operational picture. We have a Navy common operational picture. We're trying to build a joint fires network picture, but that's just fires, right? That's kinetic fires. So we're in these silos of brilliance. And how we weave that together into something is a challenge. So I would say when it comes to the partners, there are data rights, there are data transport. Those are all technology problems that we've proven we can overcome. We can, from a ones and zeros perspective, we can build mission partner environments and networks. We can transport the data, we can share it, we can use all of that. We can overcome, right? We make agreements with other nations all the time for trade, for taxes, for everything. We do a great job at this. I know as a nation we can do it. We have to bring it up to the dialogue. We have to make it a priority from the senior most levels, and then we have to govern it. We can't just say catalog your data, Meredith, in the Pacific, because we might need it to make Pacific-oriented decisions. We have to say, show me your catalog. Where's your ontology, your taxonomy? What are the data rights of that thread? Maybe it's fires, like I used. Okay, what are the data rights? Do we have any agreements in place? Someone's got to govern it and hold us accountable, I think. And then we can standardize. When we really see ourselves, then we can say, here's best practices. How do we standardize? But we also have to resource it to do that, right? We have to have talent in the seats to do it. I am your only data officer in the Pacific, right here in the Army. So my higher headquarters, INDOPACOM, the GCC, had a HQE for 1 year. But no one worked for him, so he was struggling to staff overmatch, and I've got 30 people out here. It's a challenge when we don't have talent at Echelon. So when I say resource it, I also mean the humans, not just, the cloud contract and the transport and all those things, but a full spectrum of resourcing. Over.
Awesome. Thank you, Meredith.
Thank you so much, Meredith. Thank you for your feedback. I'm gonna keep two things in mind. We don't want our talent skills to become perishable, coding you, and also we want data talent at Echelon. So with that, we conclude our presentation of our two studies. I would like to thank the members of the board working on both studies, Sue and Ryan, for the insightful updates. And Mr. Chair, we have about 15 minutes left on the clock before we delve into the future studies and review comments received from citizens. I wanted to turn it over to you for your comments on the current studies. Over to you, sir.
Well, Marina, thanks for everyone's hard work on these studies, and we look forward to making our recommendations public at the next meeting in January. Now I think we have one more thing to do, and that's to look ahead to our next set of topics. Marina, would you please share more information about the next priorities for the Defense Innovation Board, as well as any public comments that we've received?
Absolutely. So what we've been doing, the Defense Innovation Board research team supports our board members in their efforts to tackle the key issues that prevent innovation from scaling at the department. And so our focus has been to do a little bit of legwork. So we've looked at previous studies that were done from other organizations. We've listened to innovators on LinkedIn, and we do have one of the co-founders of LinkedIn here as a member of our board, Mr. Hoffman. And I know Ryan mentioned that LinkedIn has become this place where DoD innovators are coming together to share, and that's actually very true. We've been listening to DoD innovation cells like the Defense Innovation Board, and also to innovators that present their ideas in fora like TEDx DAU. So there are several topics we've been looking at, and one of them is how the DoD optimizes the way we innovate with our allies and partners. I think all of our speakers here today touched on this and touched on the war in Ukraine and the war in Israel and all the upcoming daily threats. So this is one of the key topics that this board will be exploring. We also have another topic that many DIB members have brought forward, and actually even today we heard it being validated by our speakers, which is exploring how to align incentives across different areas of expertise like contracting and budgeting, etc., to embrace calculated risk and give these leaders the top cover that they need so that they can innovate and they can explore these new technologies without the fear of not being promoted. So that's a key area we're looking at. And also other ideas that we are actually borrowing from TEDx DAU include leveraging the Web 3.0, blockchain and quantum and beyond. This topic would align with the Secretary's priority of defending the nation. We are also thinking about Bitcoin. It's the missing piece in cyber warfare. This aligns with the Secretary's priority, again, defending the nation. Another topic would be how the DoD can become an infinite player in the fifth domain. And yet another topic is how do we build a resilient nation where we actually bring innovation together for the DoD and the government and industry and academia and the public. So several ideas here that the DIB research team is bringing forward, and we wanted to open the floor for our members to present their reflections on these topics and any other ideas yet that you may have with regards to what should the DIB be looking at. The floor is open to the members.
Hey, Maria, just one thought listening to today, and I'm a requirements officer. That's where I grew up in this business. But the requirements just drive so much in terms of the entire acquisition system, and I wonder if we would do well to spend some time looking at that. And this was a conversation I had recently. What about the stuff that's going to change the world that doesn't have a military requirement? And yet, when we got it, it would change the world. And how do you open that aperture up on the requirement side? And it's the requirement of a requirement that costs us a ton of money. And I think we might be able to address that. My worry has always been, whatever the top level requirement is, individuals up and down the chain of command hang Christmas ornaments on it and just make it much more expensive. So just a thought.
Mike, just building on yours, I think that the topic of requirements is a good one. My only thought is I'm a real specify the outcome we need, because too often requirements become constraints on the things that we build, and in a weird sort of way, that in turn constrains our innovators from coming up with ways different than we thought that requirement could be satisfied. So I think it's a really good topic. And then the obverse of that is a good topic for us, is how do we better communicate to our ecosystem, in part for the reason you last said, is there will turn out to be really important technologies that aren't derived from national security requirements, that when they exist, we will know that they are necessary. How do we communicate more clearly our interest in an actionable form, and ones that can be built against? So there's kind of two sides of needs and interests, I think, could be a really interesting thing and powerful for us to explore.
Thank you so much, Sue and Admiral Mullen, for your insights. So we do have about 4 minutes on the clock. I just wanted to highlight that we did receive 57 comments from citizens, and there are some really good insights there that we've already shared with the board, and the board will take those into consideration. I'll highlight one with regards to defense companies and universities creating their own classified facility in a multi-year endeavor that's very costly. So one recommendation is to figure out how to actually allow small non-traditionals and universities to co-create and collaborate in classified infrastructure environments, so that they can cut their costs and their time and effort, but also deliver technologies to the DoD that are necessary. So with that, I would like to thank all of our members for the 2 studies, and also our speakers today, and turn it over to you, Mr. Chair, for your closing remarks.
Well, thank you, Marina. One of the things that occurred to me when Ryan was talking about data, I look at my company's business, and probably 20+% of our business is selling data that did not exist or was never collected and used before. The whole world, because of transistors and fast speeds at computation, let you do things you couldn't do before. And then there are new ways of collecting data that we never had before. The most obvious one is from space. But we collect data in lots of different ways, and it's used in ways that were never envisioned before. And without that, you just cannot compete. And we can't compete as a military power any more than we can as a commercial power. So you were spot on. And the next time I go to Hawaii, I expect the chief data officer to be there with a lei to put around my neck and say thank you. And thank you for your service, all of you. Let me also thank Undersecretary Heidi Shue for all of her work, and the entire Defense Innovation Board, including those who couldn't be with us today. Members, any closing comments? If not, thanks again. We'll see everyone at the winter board meeting in January. So all the best, everyone. And hopefully we're making a difference. And we want to thank all of those in the military who use our product, if you will, and our respect for you and our appreciation for defending our country is just better than we could ever express. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. And thank you to all our members, and thank you all for joining us today. This board meeting is now adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.